My ex used me to pay for her car while I saved for our future. Then she dumped me for someone richer and regretted everything. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I thought I finally met someone I could trust completely. I've always been careful with my heart, juggling long hours at work and saving diligently for the life I wanted, an apartment I could call mine. A stable future, maybe even a family of my own someday. I pride myself on being responsible, not just with money, but with the people I care about. So when I met Sarah, she felt like a breath of fresh air, charming, bubbly, affectionate in all the right ways. She laughed easily, listened intently, and somehow made the world feel lighter just by being in it. Our first few months together were simple but meaningful. We'd split dinner bills, take weekend trips to nearby towns, and plan vacations as if we were already building a life together. I'd picture us decorating an apartment, debating paint colors, and saving up for that first car, or maybe even a small house down the line. I'd sometimes glance at my bank account after paying our shared expenses and feel a quiet satisfaction. I was giving, but cautiously, always keeping a little aside for the future I was building. The future I hoped we'd have together. But Sarah had a way of sprinkling little hints that kept me on my toes. She'd joke about how nice it would be to have a bigger place, a fancier car, maybe a wardrobe that didn't require sales alerts. "Just dreams," she'd say, laughing, brushing it off like it was nothing. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in the back of my mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she saw those dreams as more than dreams. Still, I ignored the nagging feeling. I trusted her. I wanted to trust her. And every smile she gave me, every playful nudge when we planned our weekends, made me feel like I was making the right choices. Life felt stable, predictable, in the way I loved a rhythm I thought we'd continue forever. But deep down, there was a tiny shadow of doubt I couldn't quite shake. Little did I know, that shadow was about to grow. It started innocently enough. Sarah mentioned one evening while scrolling through her phone that her car was getting old and unreliable. "I really should get a new one soon," she said, shrugging, but her eyes lingered on a sleek model she'd been eyeing online. I remember feeling a twinge of concern for her safety. She drove a lot for work and a tiny spark of hesitation. Buying a new car wasn't exactly cheap, and I'd been saving every penny for the future we'd been dreaming about together. Still, I wanted to help. "Maybe we can figure something out together," I suggested, trying to sound casual, though my stomach knotted at the thought of dipping into my savings. She lit up instantly, brushing her hair behind her ear, and laughed. "You'd really do that for me?" she asked, the affection in her voice making me feel like I'd done the right thing. I nodded, masking the tension in my chest. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be the guy who helped the woman he loved feel safe and secure. Over the next few weeks, our dynamic subtly shifted. Sarah became more comfortable mentioning things she needed or wanted in passing, often with a laugh or a shrug. "It's just a little upgrade, nothing big," she'd say, leaning against me on the couch while we watched a movie. And every time, I'd smile, feeling proud that I could provide, feeling like I was doing my part in building a shared life, but deep down, there was a nagging voice I kept pushing away. Friends had started dropping hints, subtle comments like, "Be careful, man. She seems focused on things, not just you." I'd brush it off, laughing it off as paranoia. I trusted her. I wanted to trust her by the time we finalized the plan for her new car. I felt like I was doing something meaningful, almost like a gesture of love. It didn't feel like an expense. It felt like an investment in us, in our future. I had no idea that this favor would soon become the first step in a path that would completely unravel everything I thought. I knew about trust and love, and yet, as I handed over the first installment, a tiny, uneasy thought lingered in the back of my mind, one I couldn't quite ignore. At first, it felt like a natural rhythm. I'd cover part of the car payment, and Sarah would manage the rest, or so she said. I told myself it was fine. After all, I was in love, and love meant supporting each other. I kept meticulously saving the rest of my money for the future, for the apartment, for vacations we had been planning, and for the small dreams we whispered to each other in the quiet moments before sleep. It was a delicate balance, but I convinced myself I could handle it. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed happier than ever. She'd casually mention little indulgences, like new clothes or a weekend getaway. And I'd nod along, feeling proud that I could provide. "You're amazing, you know that," she said one night as I handed over yet another payment, her eyes glimmering with gratitude or so, I thought. It was intoxicating the way she leaned into me, the way her voice softened when she said my name. I felt needed, appreciated, like I was the hero in a story I wanted to last forever. But the cracks were subtle, creeping in unnoticed. I started noticing receipts left lying around, online orders for things she never mentioned, dinners with friends she claimed she paid for herself. Each time, I felt a small pang of doubt, but I shoved it aside, telling myself I was overthinking, that maybe I just didn't see the full picture. Friends began giving me side glances, cautioning me with phrases like, "Are you sure she's being upfront with you?" I laughed nervously and changed the subject. I wanted to believe her. I needed to, and yet, every time I logged into my bank account, I felt a mix of pride and anxiety. Pride for being generous, for investing in her happiness. Anxiety for the nagging thought that maybe I was being taken for granted. It was an uncomfortable tension, like standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to convince yourself the wind isn't strong enough to push you over. I was blind to it at the time, but that first spark of doubt was the seed of everything that was about to fall apart. And one evening, as she laughed about another tiny upgrade she wanted, a chill ran down my spine. Warning I wasn't ready to hear. I started noticing things I couldn't ignore anymore. Small lies. At first she'd claimed she couldn't afford lunch with her coworkers. Yet a photo would pop up on social media of her at a trendy cafe, sipping a latte that cost more than my own meal. Or she'd mentioned being low on cash, only for me to see online orders for clothes, gadgets, or accessories I hadn't heard about. My stomach twisted every time, but when I confronted her, she had this uncanny ability to turn it around on me. "You're imagining things," she'd say, tilting her head, her voice soft but sharp. "I told you, I've been budgeting. I don't need you to worry so much." And I would apologize, feeling guilty for even questioning her, even though the doubt lingered like a shadow at the back of my mind. I hated that I was starting to feel paranoid, hated that my trust was cracking, but the love I felt for her was still stronger than my fears. Friends began noticing my tension. "Dude, you've been too generous," one of them said over drinks. "She's taking advantage of you. Don't let her pull the wool over your eyes." I laughed it off, a nervous, forced laugh, because deep down, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to admit the possibility that someone I loved so much could be manipulating me, even as these red flags piled up. I found myself justifying her actions. Maybe she was stressed from work. Maybe she didn't realize how it looked. Maybe I was too sensitive. The rationalizations kept me locked in, clinging to a version of her and our relationship that felt safe. That felt like us. But every lie, every little inconsistency, chipped away at the foundation I thought was unshakable. I began lying to myself more than I lied to anyone else, convincing myself that my generosity wasn't being exploited, that I was just being a good partner. And then came the evening that would change everything. Sarah came home smiling, practically glowing, and casually dropped a line that made my blood run cold. "I think I might have found someone who can take care of things better than you ever could." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, sharp and sudden, leaving me gasping for air I didn't realize I was holding. "What do you mean?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper, though my hands were trembling. Sarah just laughed, the kind of light, airy laugh that used to make my heart melt, now cutting through me like glass. "I mean, I think I deserve someone who can actually give me what I want. Someone richer," she said casually, like she was talking about the weather, not the life we had been building together. I felt the room spin. The car payments I'd been making, the sacrifices I'd quietly shouldered, the late nights crunching numbers to make sure our future was on track, it all felt like a cruel joke. You're leaving me for money?" I asked, my voice breaking. Sarah shrugged, tossing her hair over her shoulder, her smile infuriatingly calm. "It's just life," she said, as if that explained everything. Every memory flashed in my mind, her laughing when I surprised her with a weekend trip. The soft way she'd held my hand while we dreamed about a shared future. The nights I stayed up late, transferring money to cover her car installments while she slept peacefully. And now, it meant nothing. Every gesture, every act of generosity, every plan we made together had been a stepping stone for her to get to someone else. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but I just sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, my chest aching with a mix of disbelief, heartbreak, and fury. My friends' warnings replayed in my head, their faces flashing behind my eyelids. How had I been so blind? How had I trusted so completely when all along I'd been walking into a trap I hadn't even seen? The room felt unbearably hot, the walls closing in as the truth sank like lead in my stomach. I realized then that this wasn't just a brick, a pit, was a betrayal so deep it cut through the very foundation of trust I had built in my life. And in that moment, I knew one thing. I would never let this go without confronting her, without seeing the truth laid bare. But I had no idea just how far her deceit ran, or how much it would cost me emotionally. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying her words over and over, each repetition digging a little deeper, a little sharper into my chest. I felt numb, hollowed out, as if every ounce of trust and love I'd poured into that relationship had been siphoned away. But somewhere under all that anger and pain, a small voice whispered, "Look closer, dig deeper." Maybe this wasn't just heartbreak. Maybe there was more to it. The next day, I went through our shared accounts, receipts, and messages, the kind of obsessive scrutiny I'd promised myself I'd never stoop to. And then I found it. Hidden transactions, secret chats. Subtle lies meticulously crafted to keep me paying for her car while she courted someone else behind my back. Every payment I'd made, every sacrifice I'd endured, had been a stepping stone, a silent enabler for her own gain. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out all over again, this time with the added weight of betrayal I couldn't ignore. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to breathe, trying to process the scope of what had happened. I wanted to scream, to throw my laptop across the room, but instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This clarity, this brutal, painful clarity, was the first spark of power I'd felt in days. I realized that knowing the truth gave me control. I could either let this destroy me, or I could let it fuel me. When Sarah texted later that evening giddy about her new life, I didn't respond. Instead, I reread every message, every transaction, every lie. And for the first time, I allowed myself to see the pattern, the manipulation, the exploitation, the calculated nature of her charm. It was all laid bare now, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, the beginnings of strategy, the beginnings of reclaiming my dignity. I knew confrontation was coming, but not yet, not when I wasn't ready. I had to let her guard down first, let her think she had one, because once she felt untouchable, that's when the truth would hit hardest. And as I sat there, staring at the evidence, I realized one chilling truth. She had underestimated me. She had no idea just how far I was willing to go to reclaim what she had taken. I hit rock bottom a few days later. It wasn't a single moment, it was a creeping, suffocating weight that pressed on me from every angle. I stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every dollar I'd given her, every night I'd sacrificed sleep to make sure we could afford that car, every plan I'd made that she had treated like it was nothing more than a stepping stone. I felt hollow, like someone had taken all the best parts of me and left a shell behind. Friends tried to reach me. "Man, you okay?" One of them asked, but I couldn't answer. How do you explain the feeling of being used by someone you trusted completely? I felt exposed, embarrassed, and furious all at once. Every memory of her laughter, every affectionate glance, every thank you that had once made my chest swell with pride now twisted into proof of my own naivety. Started doubting myself, not just my judgment, but my worth. Maybe I wasn't smart enough to see through the manipulation. Maybe I wasn't worthy of being treated with respect. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for clues I should have seen, trying to make sense of how someone could be so calculating, so cold. The apartment felt empty, the silence unbearable, and even the small comforts I'd built for myself seemed meaningless. I remember lying on my couch, staring at the carpet, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about how she had smiled while taking everything I gave her for granted. I even considered reaching out, maybe trying to salvage some shred of what we had. But the thought of her charm, her manipulation, made my stomach twist. I couldn't risk falling back into her web, and yet, in that darkness, a tiny spark flickered. I realized that this pain, as excruciating as it was, could be a weapon. If I played my cards right, I could reclaim not just my dignity, but my life. The thought gave me a strange clarity, a plan forming in the chaos of heartbreak. But I wasn't ready to act yet. Not until the timing was perfect and the truth could hit with the full weight she deserved. When I finally decided to confront Sarah, it wasn't with anger, it was with calm, cold precision. I had spent days organizing every piece of evidence, every transaction, every message that proved exactly how she had manipulated me. I wanted her to see the full scope of her actions, the way she had built her perfect little trap while I quietly supported her. The power of knowing the truth, of having the proof, gave me a strange sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. I called her over, pretending like nothing had changed. When she arrived, she was glowing, smiling in that way that had once made my heart race. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I waited until we were sitting across from each other, and then I let the first words drop. "I know everything," I said quietly, holding her gaze. Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Excuse me," she said, her voice laced with false innocence. I laid it out, one by one, the secret messages, the hidden transactions, the way she had used me to pay for her car while lining up someone richer. I watched as her confidence cracked just slightly. The first crack in the armor she'd built around herself, she stammered, tried to justify, tried to charm, but it didn't work. Every explanation sounded hollow, every excuse weak against the mountain of evidence I had meticulously gathered. I could feel the shift in the room, the tension like a live wire between us. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control anymore. And yet I didn't shout, I didn't lash out. I let the truth speak for itself. The satisfaction wasn't in vengeance, it was in exposing her, letting her see exactly what she had done and understanding that I was no longer hers to manipulate. As she sat there, pale and speechless, a wave of relief and power washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. But I knew this confrontation was just the beginning, because the full fallout of her actions and my response was only just starting to unfold. The next few days were surreal. Sarah tried to act normal, texting me casually, pretending like everything was fine, but I ignored her. Every message she sent, every attempt at charm, reminded me of how carefully she had planned everything, how she thought she could manipulate me into forgiveness. But I was done being a pawn in her game. Then I started hearing things from mutual friends, small snippets that painted a picture I hadn't expected. Apparently, her new boyfriend, the one she had left me for, was already getting frustrated. He had learned bits and pieces of her manipulations and wasn't as impressed with her charm as she thought. Suddenly, the life she had imagined as perfect was unraveling. I felt a flicker of vindication, a strange mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. I'd imagined this scenario countless times during sleepless nights, but hearing it unfold secondhand made it sharper, realer. Part of me wanted to gloat, to call her and let her know the tables had turned, but I resisted. I didn't need to. Watching her realize that she hadn't won, that her carefully laid plans were cracking under their own weight, was enough. I felt a shift inside me. The power I had reclaimed wasn't just about proving her wrong, it was about reclaiming myself. At the same time, I had to keep reminding myself not to let this turn into obsession. The heartbreak still lingered beneath the surface, and I knew I had to focus on the things I could control: my life, my finances, my future. But the knowledge that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions gave me an unexpected boost of confidence. And as I sat alone one evening, scrolling through messages I no longer needed to reply to, I realized something terrifyingly satisfying. Sarah had underestimated me. She had assumed I'd crumble, that I'd beg or apologize or somehow fall back under her spell. But I hadn't, and she was beginning to realize it. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. The best revenge wasn't in confrontation, it was in living well and letting her watch from the outside. After the dust settled, I started rebuilding my life, not just emotionally, but mentally and financially. For the first time in months, I focused on myself entirely. I threw myself into work, into saving for the future I had envisioned before Sarah ever came along, and into small joys I had neglected: weekend hikes, cooking experiments, even a few books I'd been meaning to read for years. Every step felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I had unknowingly handed over during that relationship. Friends noticed the change immediately. "You look lighter," one of them said over coffee, and I realized they were right. The constant anxiety, the late-night doubts, the gnawing guilt for being too generous or too trusting had lifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and it felt incredible. I also started paying closer attention to the little things, my boundaries, my instincts, my feelings before giving someone else the power to manipulate them. I had learned the hard way how easily generosity could be weaponized, how trust could be twisted into control. And now I was fiercely protective of both. Every small victory, being able to say no without guilt, saving money without anxiety. Enjoying my own company felt like a triumph over the years of manipulation and heartbreak. Meanwhile, Sarah's downfall became more apparent from the shadows. Mutual friends would casually drop news about her struggles with the new boyfriend, her regret over the choices she'd made, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because I wanted to revel in her pain, but because it confirmed something I had suspected all along. The truth always comes out. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, even when people try to tilt them in their favor. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled without hesitation. I was no longer the person who poured herself into someone else's dreams while neglecting her own. I was back, stronger and wiser. And I finally understood the value of investing in myself. And as I locked up my apartment that evening, heading out to a new weekend adventure, I felt the exhilarating sense of freedom. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. A few weeks later, Sarah tried reaching out again. At first, it was just text, careful, casual, laced with half apologies and attempts at charm. "Hey, I've been thinking," one read. Another, "I know I messed up. Can we talk?" For a brief second, a tiny flicker of old feelings surged, anger, mixed with a strange twinge of longing, but I quickly squashed it. I had seen the pattern. I knew exactly what she was trying to do, worm her way back into my life after everything she had done. I didn't reply, not a single word. Instead, I let her messages pile up, each one a reminder of how little power she had over me now. I had spent months rebuilding my life, and I wasn't about to hand that control back. Watching her scramble, realizing that her charm no longer worked, was oddly satisfying. She had assumed I'd crumble, assumed that guilt or lingering feelings would bring me running. But she had underestimated the depth of my resolve. Then came word from mutual friends. She was reaching out to them too, trying to explain herself, trying to soften the story, trying to reclaim some sense of control. And I smiled quietly. Not out of malice, but because the universe was doing the work for me. Her attempts were futile. She had burned the bridges she thought were solid, and now she was facing the consequences of her choices. I didn't gloat. I didn't make a scene. I let her missteps speak for themselves. And that, I realized, was the ultimate power. The best revenge wasn't in confrontation, was in my own life. In proving that I could rise above betrayal, that I could thrive despite being used, that I could rebuild everything she thought she'd taken from me. For the first time in months, I felt truly untouchable, not because I had hurt her, but because I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my happiness. She could regret all she wanted, but it no longer mattered. I had won in the only way that counted, by never losing myself in the first place. Sitting in my apartment one quiet evening, I reflected on everything that had happened, the heartbreak, the manipulation, the sleepless nights, the anger, and finally, the clarity I had gained. It was almost surreal to think that just a few months ago, I had been completely blindsided, feeling hollow and used, believing that my generosity and trust had been my undoing. Now, I felt whole again, stronger than I had ever been, with a sense of control that no one could take from me. I thought about the money I'd spent, the car payments, the trips, the countless little sacrifices, and I realized something important. None of it had truly diminished me. It had taught me lessons that no book or advice could ever have imparted. I had learned where my boundaries were, how to listen to my instincts, and most importantly, that investing in myself, emotionally, financially, mentally, was never selfish. News of Sarah's regret filtered through friends. Whispers of her realizing she had underestimated me, that the man she had thought she could use so easily had walked away unbroken, stronger, untouchable. And part of me felt satisfaction. Yes, but more than that, I felt peace. I didn't need to confront her again. didn't need to prove anything. I had already proven it to myself. I even laughed quietly at the irony. All the power she thought she had over me had always been an illusion. I hadn't needed to fight to reclaim it, had merely refused to give it away again. I was the same person she tried to manipulate, yes, but a wiser, sharper, more resilient version. As I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked out at the city skyline, I felt a surge of hope for the future. I wasn't defined by betrayal or heartbreak anymore. I was defined by how I had risen, by the life I was building with my own hands. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I smiled at the thought of Sarah finally understanding that sometimes the best revenge is living wealth, thriving, succeeding, and moving forward with strength that no one can ever take away. I had lost a love, yes, but I had found myself. And that was everything.